Ladies and gentlemen, we're sitting here with the Lickerish Quartet. How the devil are you all?
Best as can be expected, thank you.
Yeah, doing well.
So first of all, how are you, but where are you? And starting on the top left, we have Mr. Eric Dover on the picture everybody's going to see here. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing super, Warren, and yourself?
Marvelous. But are you in sunny LA or?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm in Northridge.
Lovely. And Tim Smith, how are you?
I'm good. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, on the East Coast, so keeping it real. Rocking the 930 T-shirt.
Yeah. Were you
930 Club?
Were you there when it was both the newer and the older one?
Mm-hmm.
So you were there with the Rats.
Yeah. Yes. And was told you're lucky to be here. It's like, thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
It was very famous in those days for being rat infested backstage. You just see these rats running around. Yeah. Roger Manning Jr., how are you?
Really good. I get to hibernate in my recently finished workroom at our house.
Beautiful.
In Mount Washington area of Los Angeles. So I just didn't have to shift gears much. Went right into my hibernation with all my modules and vintage synths surrounding me.
Amazing. And then, of course, last but no means least, Mr. Ken Schlueter. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me, Warren.
And you are in the LA area as well.
I'm in beautiful Monrovia, California, so just a bit east of LA.
I have a million questions. How did this come about? And my guess is, did it take a long time to come about? Were you talking about it for quite a few years on and off? And I mean, I know it's probably not an easy question, but it's a long answer.
Well, I'll take it. No, it wasn't. The making of the EP was a long time coming for a variety of reasons. But I called Tim up with an idea of just getting together and writing for old time's sake, because we hadn't hung out as friends or as musicians since I couldn't remember. He loved the idea and was getting ready to jump out on a plane. And then we kept talking some more and realized that it would be in our best interest to call up Eric Dover and see if he was also interested in this kind of experiment. And that all happened at Eric's backyard workspace, March of 2017, believe it or not. So, I mean, long story short, it was a series of writing sessions. We got excited enough about what we were doing to want to record it. And our good friend Jeremy Stacy, for years had said, anytime you guys got something going on, give me a shout. And he made good on that. He just, went beyond the call of duty, flew in from England, cut us the super bro rate. And next on the list was call Ken Schlueter. We need a drum sound, buddy. And I just worked at his studio in Burbank, where he was at the time, and thought it would be the perfect kind of modest accommodations for what we wanted to do. And that all happened, I believe, in the summer of 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And then it was just patchwork from there.
What's amazing
for the next 2 years.
What's amazing, when you and I first talked, I mentioned that I'd seen you playing at Clapham Grand in London. So it would have been you three guys playing there. And of course, the band that opened was the Lemon Trees. And of course, the Stacey brothers were in the Lemon Trees. Did you? Yeah,
they kept up with us, or Jeremy particularly kept up with me. He was just we would hang out a lot on that tour, but I actually got him an audition to play with Sheryl Crow when I was playing with her. We were doing some TV stuff in the UK. We needed some people to mime a TV show. So he came along and did that. And Mike Rowe, who also ended up playing with us, another Brit who played with Oasis, and I played with him in Noel Gallagher's band. Anyway, they jumped on board, and we just stayed in touch and played in other bands forever.
That's amazing.
Did a lot of stuff with Jeremy. Yeah,
I was an incredible drummer. I remember that show really vividly. And I remember Lemon Trees were fantastic. They had one of the guys from the Flying Pickets was singing with them. It was just like, and Guy Chambers obviously is a great writer. And we were all like, we knew Guy, my group of friends, but we came to see you guys, and it was wonderful that they were opening. And we're all like, yeah, they're amazing. And then you guys came out and just probably unfair to say blew him off the stage, but you did. The harmonies were unbelievable. After just hearing Guy and all of his guys, it was just such an incredible show. In a very strange venue. You remember the way the stage kind of funnels up? It's an old Victorian-style music hall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And I remember thinking Eric looked like Paul Kossoff. And like you had the flares on, just like Kossoff, and you had the Kossoff stance. And I remember just thinking that was the coolest thing. Yeah, it was an absolutely amazing show. So, how did you do it all together, or did you end up, due to geography, doing some of this stuff remotely? What was the kind of process of recording?
Well, we started out working over at Ken's studio. I can't remember the name of the studio, Ken. What was the name of the? It wasn't.
It's any place I'm working in these days, I just refer to as the sweet spot. So I think at the time we called that the sweet spot, and now we call this the sweet spot.
Okay. So we started working with Ken over at the sweet spot, and when we brought Jeremy in, we did all the basic tracks, and what was it, a couple of days, and then it became a question of just finding time for us to get together. I would fly out to Los Angeles every, between things where people were on tour, and Roger was doing Beck touring and stuff. So we'd find time and try and come out for 10 days to 2 weeks and just start, going through all the chunks of things that we had kind of worked out and working them out. At the lab studio we moved over to with
Frankie
Saragusa, sorry. And that was a little bit more kind of mellow because it was over on the side of town nearer where Roger was, and I was staying at the studio there. And we just had lists of things to go through. It was a little harder for me because I had to sort of bring what I could bring. I ended up buying a Kemper, which I hadn't really used before, but it became really useful for me to quickly be able to dial in, just at least getting us in the ballpark of sounds. And we ended up using it a fair amount and mixing it with other amps and stuff as well. But that was a real big game changer for me to work on stuff. Did
you create your own Kemper sounds from your own stuff, or were you using some of the sounds inside?
I had some of my stuff. I had an AC30 and a 65 amp that I had profiled, just because I knew them, and it was like a reference point for me to go. But when I would be, because you know how that thing is, just sitting there going through so many AC30s, your head's just, you're exploding.
Yeah.
But I actually found the more useful ones were obscure, like really directy, like through the console kind of sounds were more useful to me than, because we had an AC30 there, it was fine. But there were other things that were just more quick and easy to get to that I liked. The Kemper.
Fantastic. So, can you tell me a little bit about the writing process? I sort of skipped ahead to the recording, but the writing process in itself, was that a remote thing though? Because obviously that can be quite time consuming. So were you doing it one-on-one? Were you coming up with ideas and just emailing them to each other? Or I suppose a bit of both?
Well, for me, and anybody can chime in here, but the actual writing part, the sharing and exchanging of ideas, that was the funnest part for me in a lot of ways. Great. Because we knew we wanted to hang out and have dinner for the first time in 20 years together. But, bearing your soul and sharing ideas, no matter how many times you've done it with people you trust and feel safe with, is always a, very challenging, potentially challenging experience. And so we each just started offering up, hey, I have this chorus idea. It sounds like a chorus to me. I really, really believe in it. Don't know where to take it. Let me play it for you and Tim and see where it goes. We just did a lot of that. And it was pretty rewarding pretty fast. And we tried not to be precious about stuff. If we felt excited about working on something, we'd pursue it. Save it into our phones, listen to it the next day. And we just did that for it was two, if I'm not mistaken, it was 2-week sessions. So we had something like 20 plus ideas from scraps that we each had. And obviously each person kind of took the lead on an idea, especially if they were the one presenting it, and singing and mumbling gibberish. And I hear this melody line, and somebody might just chime in with a harmony. And then we even went as far as to really try to arrange them beginning to end just vocal and guitar, vocal and piano, because I think we all were in absolute agreement that if we didn't leave Eric's workplace with a skeleton that was solid, we could have the best drummers and the best drum sound and all that stuff on it, and it wasn't going to amount to anything. So it was very much trying to get clarity on our ideas at Eric's place there.
Do you sort of feel like you all have individual strengths, or do you feel like it's all equal? Like, is it, one of you feels like you are predominantly a lyricist? Is there any sort of dynamic, or is it each song just kind of went its own way? So maybe you were more predominant, one of you on a lyrics on this song, or I'm just interested in the process, because you're all obviously very talented individually. And one of the things I think we all admire about the best bands in the world is that there's more than one songwriter in them. That's when everybody says Beatles, Queen, blah, 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 Supertramp. I mean, you had 2 lead singers and 2 great songwriters. There's no doubt they had, like, a top 10 single every year of the 70s. So 10cc is probably the most obvious one outside of the Beatles, 4 amazing songwriters. So for you, I'm really intrigued how that process would work.
Tim or Roger will bring in an idea for a song, but that inspires other things to happen. Once Tim played Magic Number, I was hearing certain kind of spooky guitar sound, that kind of thing.
Right.
Well, I think we trusted each other more than anything, and because part of what was exciting about getting together was that we hadn't seen each other for a while, so we're kind of catching up and talking about things, but we were all able to use our knowledge and love of music that we could share. So, if Roger spoke of a keyboard thing and I went, that sounds like Roxy Music, but it would be the Brian Eno period of Roxy Music versus the later Avalon stuff or whatever. Yep. And when you already kind of have that in your head and you already have all these bullets in your gun that you can trust each other with, then I know Eric was specifically pretty good at doing lyrics to some things just out of nowhere. The next day he showed up with the lyrics to Lighthouse Spaceship, and he did the same with Fadoodle. It was just like we didn't have to collaborate on them. They were completely sort of mostly finished ideas that came out of just him hearing what we were doing, and we trusted him with that. It wasn't much we had to go, sorry, no thanks. He just knocked it out, I thought.
For me, you're probably the only band that I can hear all of the influences without it ever sounding like you stole. Does that make sense? There's lots of bands. There's some current bands. We won't have to get into names. That basically sounds like Led Zeppelin, but without the songs being necessarily as good.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're referring to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, who the hell are you talking about?
Yeah. So, but I don't want to be like the old wagging finger guy. But you know what I mean. Where when anybody hears the work that you did with Jellyfish and this new record, you can satisfy all us as fans, and we love all of your references. But you don't ever sound like you just took the guitar part or the this bit, which is very, very unique. So I suppose my question is, how are you ever conscious of that? Because I remember working with Jet on their second album, and they were so freaked out because people were telling them that this song sounded like AC/DC, that song, and it made them second guess their whole creative process. So is that even come up in your mind, or you just don't give a crap and you just do what you want?
Well, I'll speak for myself on this as one of the 3 songwriters. For me, it's all about coming up with an idea that you're excited enough about and you believe in enough about to share with your writing partners, first of all, which is kind of the first audition. Now, somewhere in there, I personally have put an idea down on my phone, or some of these songs on the new EP are from ideas I had literally in college. They would have been off cassette tapes and stuff. But I have Beck calls it the let it simmer process. It's like I put it down, I'm excited about it. Well, that doesn't mean in a week or 2 when I come back to it, it's going to be as exciting for me and as novel and as all that. So one of the things that happens is if I'm listening back, hopefully more objective, and you can go right away, man, you can't do that. It's you basically took Maybe I'm Amazed and you just shifted it a little bit. Now, as a practice songwriter, having done this ad infinitum, that alarm goes off within seconds, ideally. So to me, it's not going off for other people. I don't know if they're as practiced or self-aware, but it's like, I don't want any of my heroes, including my bandmates, to go, you know what you just ripped off, right? I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to be very hyper aware of those types of things. And then as far as going into the arranging of the tune, we're going to put electric piano here, a background vocal of this style here, a guitar riff of this style here. We're always going to be inspired by the great art that's preceded us. But again, I think through practice and diligence, there's that place where you can't be afraid to be yourself. And I think really for all of our heroes, it's all about just wanting to try to do something that great. And why we're, we refer to XTC, for example. I mean, I can't hear their record collection, but I know what age they are. So I know what the record collection was. But I don't hear it in the final arrangements and songwriting because they're too practiced at honing their own sound. So I'm happy that our ideas and what we offer have a familiarity for people to sink their teeth into and make them feel good. It reminds them of something that's inspired them. But yeah, we've never. None of the projects I've ever been involved with have had being the Dukes of Stratosphere as the goal.
Sure.
As much as I love the Dukes of Stratosphere, that's not. Yeah. To me, it's always been. Well, I've been very self-aware of the genre of rock pop that has inspired me, and that my writing tendencies borrow from that toolbox. But to me, great art doesn't mean, hey guys, I got somewhere within the proximity of that brilliant John Lennon song. That's not an achievement. It's, I said my own thing and made my own contribution to that great legacy. If it reminds somebody of John Lennon, so be it. That's not so that's how I look at it. If that's clear.
I think even working with Ken, Ken brought a lot of his, Midwest Chicago dirty side of town. So he knew all the stuff that because he had done so many records where like I said, you have this catalog of sounds in your head that he could hear a tune and go, okay, this is clearly this, or this is let's try this or whatever. And if it got too far, we're not going to gate the drums like Hugh Padgham or something, but it could have. We could have done all that and been laughing at ourselves, but it wouldn't have served the song in the way that was the intention or whatever. But it's good that we were surrounded together and with people like Ken that could have that knowledge, but could pull back when they needed to, when it was more important to get the song idea through.
And I mean, I think everyone had the same taste. So I don't think I would have been in the room if I hadn't made a connection with Roger, that Roger knew at some level, could reference these sounds and records, but at the same time, I mean, even in the tools that we used, like nobody was going down like saying like it has to be a real clavinet or it has to be, an actual AC-15. It has to be a solid state box. Because you know what I'm saying? It's like no one ever asked me like, can we make this record sound like it's from 1972? You know what I mean? Like as far as I'm concerned, it's a modern sounding record, but it's a modern sounding record sounded like made by people who've been listening to all of pop music since day one up until the day that we worked on it, and I think that's everyone involved. And to even say like who was involved with what, I was surprised myself as a fly on the wall, not being in the band, watching their chemistry. The fact that everyone showed up with a song idea that wasn't 100% written. So people finishing the other songs is what doesn't make it not a collection of a bunch of songwriters' tunes. It sounds like a band because Eric would write a lyric on top of a melody line that Roger had been humming, and Fadoodle, as Tim mentioned, is a perfect example of when I did the scratch vocal for Fadoodle. I remember we were in a stage where we were focused on getting like acoustic guitar and piano sort of like blocking out the chords for every song, because then they were going to go off into overdub land. And And we said, okay, well, we got a half a day left. We want to just do some scratch vocals. And Eric walks in with his iPad going, hey, I got some lyric ideas for this song.
Nice. Very nice.
And I'll say that, the lyrics were really funny and really, but also I got to say that, like, he hands them to Roger and a lyric, it can't just be a clever lyric. It has to sing right, meaning it has to roll off the tongue smooth. And the fact that, these guys were doing this, and that, like, on Roger's first take, those lyrics rolled right off of his tongue. And if those had to be a final vocal, they could have been. And then these guys,
you're too kind.
And then also they're like, well, we got some harmony ideas here. We want to do some harmony ideas. So we'll just all get out on headphones around one mic. Now, with most bands, that's going to be just a train wreck. No, this isn't going to be a bad idea. No, let's do every one at a time. And these guys are out on one mic, just trying out little harmony ideas. And as you would imagine, it was impressive sounding. I can count on my hand the number of times in the recording sessions that I've been on that somebody comes up with an idea that radical, and then you're actually like, wow, it worked. And then I remember Tim was in the room the moment Eric did her first scratch vocal, and we hear Eric sounding like just the most gigantic voice ever, and we're just looking at each other like, is this happening? It's crazy. The crazy moment. I'll never forget it.
That's amazing. I like this idea, of what was intimated by Tim about you, Ken, is like that the bit of the edge, the bit of the indie, and that's probably what I'm getting, because if any of us went full-blown Supertramp or 10cc, it would probably end up as being like, oh, what a nice record. Those boys were very nice. They made a really nice record. But it doesn't have that. It has an edge. It has the influences that we're all talking about and love, but it still sounds like people that like rock and roll. It's not the twilight of your career going, hi, everybody. You know what I mean? It's got some edge to it. So
thank you for noticing.
Good. Well,
I'm a knucklehead, I really appreciate, I really appreciate the Jim Scott calls it the big note, meaning like I like a little bit of art in my rock and roll. I don't like my rock and roll in my art. You know what I mean? I want to, and I think that's something that we
I just made a T-shirt for you with that.
There we go. But yeah, for me, it's still, and now, like, for example, on the Facebook, 20 favorite albums comes along, and I sit down and I think about what my 20 favorite albums are, and tied for 21st are all my, like, oh, I love this Wire record and stuff like that. But most of it is like classic rock, like Aerosmith, and it's stuff that we've talked about. We were all kind of brought up on this on the same thing, and I think that maybe the Chicago indie edge is that combined with, I think that the like my sonic mentors being and I've mentioned this before, is like Jim Scott, Ciccarelli, Don Smith is there's nothing subtle about it. It's blunt. You know what I mean? It's if anything, better to err on the edge of too aggressive than not aggressive enough. You know what I mean? Too aggressive can always work, not aggressive enough. And also, if you listen to like a Psychedelic Furs record or something that's like a new wave record, that's for the girls. You know what I mean? Like, this is about sexy singer for the girls, and then you listen to it. There's a lot of meat on the bone there. Those things are recorded like proper rock records. And so I wanted to, compliment, with Rogers and all these guys' ability to really go into this Wrecking Crew style thing. To complement that, to balance it out, you got to kind of have somebody who's a little bit trying to keep it for the kids, if that makes sense.
Well, I just wanted to add real quick to your comment. Essentially, what you're describing for me is Elvis Costello. Whether you're talking about him as a songwriter and a performer, or the best band in the world that he seemed to have attracted to himself, and the huge body of literature and genre exploration that they've done as a group, whether it's a ballad or an actual kind of in-your-face 2.5 minute pop punk song. The edge, that desperation, that streetwise urgency, as Robert Hilburn always used to review bands with, is always there. There's a rawness. There's a the passion is not open to interpretation. It's here's my passion, take it or leave it. And I think it is that era that we grew up in, because you understand finesse, subtlety, high art, and simultaneously you were listening to music that was all about, search and destroy that very thing. The joy was to acknowledge that, recognize it, even honor it, and then almost sabotage it as an art form. And this has been going on for the past century, but certainly in music, we all lived through that. And of course, that's present in what we do, thankfully. So again, thanks for noticing.
When's the release date? When is the EP out?
May 15th, officially.
May 15th.
Doing 2 months of pre-order and getting people just refamiliarizing them, making an announcement. And again, because the record business has changed so much, and because I had a generally successful campaign on Pledge in 2018, it's been very important to us to be as smart and honoring of our fan base that by some crazy miracle has hung in there with us no matter what we've been up to, and just making sure they all know there's new original music available to you. So that's why there's this kind of like process and this arc of announcement to everybody, and engaging with them. There's ways that they're going to be involved in the fan funding aspect of this, and so that's really exciting because again, our fans are like a mini Grateful Dead collective in their obsession, and it's so incredible, and we're so thankful for that.
It's amazing. Well, there will, of course, be a link for that pre-order down below there. So everybody that's watching, click below the video and you'll see a link to pre-order down there. Also, young Ken over here has done a mixed breakdown of one of the songs, haven't you, Ken? Tell us a little bit about that.
It's true.
What?
What?
So we did that a couple weeks ago. Just kind of went through all the tracks, and I don't know. I haven't seen it since. It was funny because that was the day, if you remember, we were filming the mixed breakdown, and my wife comes home with like half the grocery store, and we're looking at her like she's out of her mind. And literally within a couple hours, as we're reading the news,
we're in lockdown.
Like Warren's wife's telling us to go buy what's left of the grocery store, and I haven't really seen anyone. But So we dug into the multi-track, and I just kind of explained as best as I could. I wasn't around for a big chunk of the overdubs, but as best as I could.
Now that's for the single, isn't it? That's for the single, which is actually out, is it not?
Lighthouse Spaceship, yeah.
So that's a
lot of stuff to go through.
It's a lot of stuff, and we will put the link, the Spotify link to that track below as well. So for those of you watching, you can, if you haven't already, I'm sure you've already listened to it 100 times, but you can go and listen to it even more. So it started off at Ken's original studio, then you went to Frankie's studio. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then I presume you were doing some stuff remotely. Did you end up doing overdubs on your own?
So all of the above. Yeah,
all of the above.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. So
I recorded some bass tracks here at my house and would send them and stuff. Yeah.
So give me a little bit of an idea about some of your individual setups. So if you're cutting vocals on your own, for instance, what is your vocal setup? Eric, what is your vocal setup?
It's just, we'll have a Rode Classic and, a small outboard kind of optical compressor, not a very expensive one. Minimum setup as far as tracking vocals in, yes.
So would you end up doing some of the vocals on your own and then sending them back to Ken to mix?
We did as far as the lead vocals, we did over at Frankie's place because Roger has a really fantastic U67 clone. Who makes that, Roger?
It's Peluso 67.
I love Peluso.
Very much a fan of.
Yeah.
That was a recent acquisition just as we started really leaning into vocals on this EP.
Fantastic.
And we did some mic shootouts for that too, right? Didn't we? You had a couple of other things, and we sang on.
No, we rented and we went down to Vintage King for starters.
That's right.
and just like wore out our welcome.
That's great. The Peluso's great. That's you probably know this. That's a husband and wife team, and they make it. I can't remember where it is. It's pretty remote. They live. I know somebody went to interview them and told me that they flew into an airport and then drove for an hour and a half. Where are they?
West Virginia. John's from Chicago, and he was the head studio tech at Universal Recording, which was the original Bill Putnam studio, and he was sort of like the top, most knowledgeable guy in Chicago. That he would fix your tape machine if you could get them, and then he moved and fix your microphones, obviously, and then he moved to West Virginia and started his microphone company. And, you know, if you look at it in context, it's, you know, if you open up a German microphone, if you have access or can create those components, you know, there's the reason why like a U47 is $15,000 is because of absolute gear fetishism. You know what I'm saying? And then you got a guy like John Peluso who comes along and says, well, I'm going to make this microphone and I'm going to price it as if it was like a new microphone that was coming out. And, you know, when Neumann's first came out, they weren't expensive because there wasn't the internet, like just, you know, creating the mythology behind it all. But, they're fantastic. All of his lines are fantastic microphones. And yeah, and I'll tell you just from a mixer's point of view, the biggest tell of a cheap microphone is if you're finding, it's not just about like, is there a lot of sibilance or is there not a lot of sibilance? Because there's oftentimes it's what is the quality of the sibilance? You know what I'm saying? And if you don't have enough sibilance, you lose all the, you know, you want a vocal to be upfront and 3D. And so you need to have that upper mid-range quality. And that's where the cheap mic, the difference between a cheap mic and a well-made microphone, in my opinion, especially once you start really wrenching on the compression, if your microphone doesn't sound good, you're going to hear it, you know. That said, any of these dudes are going to sound pretty good on any microphone you stick in front of them. That's you know, that's the deal. Gosh.
Are they like Venmoing you money?
It's always $5. He wants the big money.
Oh, has he not got his back end yet?
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Back end. This is 2020.
I'll give him his back.
What does back end mean?
Yeah, I'll give you your back end.
I have no idea. No idea whatsoever. So I suppose, yeah, this is fun. People who watch this channel love gear. So is there any kind of fun gear stuff? We've heard from Ken and Tim that both of you said that, you know, you just use whatever was available, whether it be a Kemper or whether it be a virtual instrument. I remember when we did the mix breakdown, Ken, there was a couple of things on there that were virtual, weren't there?
Well, for example, in Eric Dover, you could comment on this because, you know, a lot of stuff by the time it came to me, it was a fair amount of the guitars were just Native Instruments guitar rigs. And, you know, and they were still in place. And, you know, so a lot of the guitar tones that sound classic sort of, you know, what you'd imagine like really satisfying rock is like an AC-37 on a guitar rig. So, you know, it's, I got the impression from what I could tell from looking at the mix session that all that matters is how it sounds coming out of the speakers.
Sure.
You know what I mean? That's all that mattered. And these guys are picky. I mean, you know what I mean? I can imagine. You know, yeah, I mean, I know that, like, for example, to get a bass chorus sound on Fadoodle, it wasn't like usually I can just throw up the first chorus and it's like, yeah, all right, bass chorus. And we went and we listened to every chorus plugin I had, because in my mind, what I see, and the guys will probably agree with me, you know, I could say this with all the guys, but particularly Roger, because Roger sat with me and we mixed the record together. And the one thing with mixing is that any mix that you do, it has to be one person's vision. Now, if you're a young band and you've never made a record before, that vision is probably going to be the mixer's vision. And that's often the situation that I'm in. But with this, I realized it didn't take me long to realize, like, Roger hears this whole thing in his head finished, and we're just, I mean, I'm not just randomly turning knobs and looking to see if he's happy or not. You know, we had to do a lot of, I mean, there was maybe a little of
I was going to say, you like that? Huh?
Mute, unmute, pan, mute.
But my point being is that, in other words, if Roger heard a treatment on something or a certain reverb on something, it wasn't because he was like, hey, let's just try a bunch of things and see what we like. I think he heard it as it was meant to be. And the great thing about that is as frustrating as that could be as an engineer, kind of going, well, do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like this? Once we nailed it, boom, we nailed it. And then we were moving on. So, you know, the process was slow, but it was never like, getting lost. I never felt like we got lost and we didn't know up from down, left from right. But it was just a process of getting it to a certain point. And then on top of that, because, you know, sometimes on these songs, the lead vocal is a baton that gets passed between three dudes. And so you have to dial every guy in the most flattering way to make their voice sound great. But when the baton passes from one to the other, it's got to make sense. And so you got to find something that makes all three of these guys sound great on their own, but also there has to be a common theme amongst them. And so that was something that took some time as well. And so that was, but I think that like any process was any process or technique that needed to get it sounding right coming out of the speakers, everybody was up for, you know what I mean? And there was also, and this is just from day one of the record making, there wasn't any the shortcuts aren't going to work on this project, meaning that like that thing that you do that most people go, oh yeah, that's fine. It's like, no, we tried. Well, for example, I remember like Jeremy showed up with like 6 drum kits. I mean, maybe more, maybe more.
In your old studio, where did you put them?
Well, we couldn't even just eat lunch out the lounge. We had to like move like 4 times out of the way, and it was. But the funny thing is that the first one we put up was the best, and then we kind of started feeling like, well, we are making a proper record. We should try out some other, we should try out some other kits. And I mean, we might even have just put back the original one. In other words, that one just worked all the time, and Jeremy was, here's a perfect example of something is, like Jeremy would hear the song, would hear the demo or, whether it was played for him or not. And he would have it in his mind, like, this is the hi-hat I need for this. And, I see drummers changing out their snare drum a fair amount, but I don't see drummers changing hi-hats as often. But if you think about a drum beat, the hi-hat is the busiest instrument in your entire mix happening. And he would know, like, I need one that rings. This one needs to be an old, Al Green one. And so there was a lot of, these kind of records that are dense, it's a million tiny little tweaks that make up the cumulative whole of the quality of it. And that started from day one. And no one was ever interested in sort of just, there was never any like good enough, because anything that was like, oh, good enough was going to have to be readdressed later and was going to have to, be done right. So that's,
And Roger, I have to let you know, when I was sitting with Ken talking about this record, he spoke about you when you weren't there just the same way. He said Roger was really, really particular and he really had a very clear vision. So, yeah.
Well, and I was in his living room greeting his family every day as they came home from work and from school. And,
that's the craziest thing is that I was building my room out. So the first like 15 minutes of the session was getting my dog to get off Roger's lap.
Yes, the most beautiful dog on the planet.
Yeah. And then, and we were working. I mean, the one thing I'll say is that, what was interesting though, is I could tell that like, I mean, my son, for example, would come up to me and he's like, Dad, I've heard a lot of stuff that you've worked on over the years. This stuff sounds like it's like a whole nother quality than most stuff that you work on. And he's like, I think your friend Roger like might be like working at a different level than some of the other people that you work with. And I'm like, yes, son, you're right.
Very astute kid you have there.
That's right. Yeah.
But he's a straight up teenager. So I was very, very flattered because I know what all of his peers are listening to, including him. And no, just to Ken and his family's credit. I mean, I just start going because I don't, as I've told you, Warren, I don't have the hours on all the gear. And I just start describing what I'm hearing. And there's a whole way to be a quality communicator that gets his point across and respectful. And sometimes I fail terribly short of that. And Ken never kicked me out of his house. So,
there was never a point where I don't feel like this way. There was never a point where I felt like, and I can't say this with everything I've worked on, but I never felt like if I felt like he was just like wavering and just not respecting my time, but I could always feel that we were getting somewhere. You know what I mean? Like I never felt the pure frustration of like, this is going nowhere. And I liked yesterday's mix better. You know, there was genuinely none of that. You know?
I remember that. What is it, the Quincy Jones quote about Stevie Wonder, that he always left enough room in the room for God, meaning no ego. And for me, it's like, I'll try 57 different things, to get the right thing. I think we all will, if we know it's coming from a pure place to actually make it better. I think the only time I've ever personally kind of butted heads with somebody where I feel like it's just somebody wants to be right. They don't want it necessarily to be better. I mean, I love the idea. I mean, trust me, I can imagine it was a pretty amazing experience to be in your position. I mean, Roger's, even though he's there, I'll cover him up. I mean, these guys are stupidly talented, just speaking engineer to engineer here. And you want to know what's going on. We want to know what's going on in your guys' heads because we learn from that. And if you change your mind and come up with a better idea, we want to know it. What you mean there's something better? It's only when it's ego that I think for us, it gets a little frustrating, doesn't it, as an engineer?
Well, and I think that's oftentimes people are trying to, sessions go weird when there's a struggle for who's going to control the session. You know what I mean? And so you just realize that, like, sometimes I'm the guy controlling the session. Sometimes I'm not the guy controlling the session. You know what I mean? And then you just realize pretty quick, for me to get this to where he wants it to be. And I got to say, one other thing about Roger is that, and this, as a studio whiz as Roger is, he's not, he might do some overdubs himself, but I don't think Roger, he doesn't identify with being an engineer. And I think part of that is because he's worked with, so many good engineers over the years, whereas, and this isn't like a get off my lawn type of thing, but younger guys, and granted, the role of engineer is changing with modern times, because it's getting easier to do. But if you're like a guitar player guy who did a couple overdubs that you sent on to like your, buddy's girlfriend's like track, and then you did that's not engineering. That's not being an engineer. You know what I mean? And I think that on some level, if Roger showed up and he had his own ideas about the way I should get him the results, that would have been harder to do. But all he cared about was just, in other words, he would explain to me on the top level of what he wanted it to sound like, but he would leave it to me to figure out how to get it to him. And as I said, once we got it, and we were moving on. And that was, so it was methodical.
I do love that. We all know this quote, the famous Tom Petty quote, where he said if he'd been a good guitar player, he wouldn't have been a very good songwriter. So I think that's also the thing, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's, know your lane.
Even when we were tracking stuff, I mean, I don't consider myself a virtuoso of any instrument. I can play a bunch of things and I have with other people, but Roger would often ask, to play a part until we got it right. And even in the Jellyfish days, I know Eric and I, when we first learned how to sing in harmony together as a ensemble, the kind of dedication that it took, just, it sounded cool, but it wasn't 100%. And to get to 100%, you really had to put in the hours. And you just can't have an ego with that. When you're doing those kind of stacked big vocal things, Roger would say, okay, prepare yourself. The next 5 hours are going to be boring and trivial. And we're all going to be going, 1,000 times. And you just, again, it's a matter of trust because we knew, he could go out and block the chord on the piano and say, this is what the end game, but we got to get there by doing these 5 things. And some of it was harder for me to do, but I like that struggle of like not being a virtuoso guitar player, but trying to play a solo. I can hear the struggle, and that's important to me.
So
we had Roger play like a punk rock guitar thing on one of the songs. He would tell all of us how to play it. Like, no, it's got to be like this. And it's just about 3 minutes. It's like, here, you do it. And he nailed it. It was awesome.
Well, I didn't nail it, but let's just say it was a punk rock song. In other words, there's some good lack of technique struggle in the performance.
Right.
It worked for the tune.
That's fantastic.
Some parallel fists.
Yeah.
Parallel fists. So talking of playing live, we're in the middle of a freaking lockdown, obviously. But are you going to tour this? Are you going to guys go out and tour this?
Well, we're not opposed to it. It just other stars have to align. I think we'd be very game if a promoter or somebody presented to us some kind of key market tour that made sense, and we could pay everybody who was going to be our infrastructure to help us do that. And as Tim just said, we set the bar way the hell up here with we give no concern to, is this replicable live, reproduceable?
Yeah, we haven't.
I was sort of thinking
this
that.
It's not like busking blues songs. It's like, hey, let's show up in Chicago and start in G, baby. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. I'm thinking to myself that this is going to be. But then look, when I saw you guys at Clapham Grand, I mean, I had the same reaction, Tim, that you did on their first album. I was just like, there's no way those vocals are live. And Matt Butcher was the front of house for, you probably met Matt, I don't expect him. He's one of my childhood friends, and he was front of house for the Lemon Trees at that show. And I was like, he was standing there standing next to your sound man. And I was like, what were they using? And this is rack mount auto tune. We're talking early 90s. So none of that stuff even existed. And I was like, what are they using? And he's like, their voices. And I was like, no, don't tell me that. Tell me that there's some magic. Because, I didn't understand half the freaking magic of studio equipment in those days. Heck, I still don't. But you know what I mean? It's just like, I was expecting some, H3000-y, whatever. And no, it was just, the fact that you, as you were pointing out, you did your 10,000 hours just on the backgrounds, let alone everything else.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So, Eric, outside of working with these lovely gentlemen, what are you currently doing? Well, you're currently in lockdown, but when you're not in lockdown, what have you got? What have you been working on?
Well, as you know, I have my solo project Sextus, which I've had for a number of years. And I believe when we actually met at the Swing House, that's what I was working on, a few Sextus tracks. So I'm preparing to release half a dozen of those, so another EP.
Wonderful.
At some point in the next months. I do sessions occasionally. I do a lot of gardening, beekeeping.
Beekeeping. Wasn't it Ian Anderson that was like a salmon? He owned a salmon farm, isn't that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he still does.
Yeah. I remember the same thing. Somebody asked him, what are you working on? He goes, salmon. So I like that, gardening and salmon.
I think the musician career is really suited for I do this and then I do one other unrelated thing. It's not like Kate Pearson has her little Airstreamer hotel resort, and there's always I mean I don't know what my other thing is yet, but I'm looking for it.
I think
it's called Dad Coach.
I think it depends on whether you're a dad or not, and if you are a dad, how old your kids are. Because my only other thing is kids.
When you mentioned particularly Steely Dan, the one thing I was really glad about when I got involved in this project is I felt like everything that I've been working on, and Warren, you might have this too as a engineer and mixer. This is the first project in a long time that the band wasn't asking me to add just a gratuitous amount of distortion to everything, meaning the decapitator on the vocal and the doing, you know what I'm saying? And I remember in my mind thinking to myself, all these records with that production style, they sound so exciting for the first 30 seconds, and then your instinct is just turn it down.
Your ears are exhausted.
And then go and check your email, because your ears can't listen to more of that. And I was always, and right around when I got involved with this, I was thinking, somebody's going to come along. I want to make a record. And we weren't trying to keep everything like clear and pristine, but just not obsessed with distorting anything unnecessarily, you know. And this was the one, and it came by. And the one thing I'll say is I think that one of the goals is we wanted to make a record that sounded like, no matter how loud you turn it up on your stereo, it was never going to, the louder, the better. And it was never going to fry your ears out, which is the way records sounded like when I was a kid.
Oh God, yes. We must have all had the experience of listening to like Highway to Hell or Back in Black in the car. And you just kept turning it up, and you look down at the speedometer and you're doing 85. There's just something, you know what I mean?
Well, it was that time when I was young and learning those songs and thinking that they were way more distorted than they were. And pulling out my distortion pedals and going, why doesn't this sound like that? And then making the connection, because they're not that distorted. Mm-hmm. It's just ballsy. Yep. And not knowing, it was interesting.
And they just get better, louder.
It's sort of like fake attitude.
Yeah.
So Tim, what are you, outside of working with these wonderful guys, what are you working on?
Well, in lockdown mode, I'm baking a lot of bread. Most people are getting into. Yeah, I mean, I was touring pretty much as a side guy for so long, and did the Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds for about 5 years. And when that finished, is sort of when Roger called me. Kind of decided not to do so much of that, and so been focusing on this, some session stuff here. But I was on the road so much, and I got married. My wife's British. And she moved over here, and then I was always on the road. So we're just kind of having our second or third honeymoon of just kind of hanging out, which has been awesome.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And Big Rog, some Beck stuff coming up once the lockdown mode goes. Are you guys going to tour, or what are you working on?
There was. I mean, I'm sure we'll try our best to resume, because I mean, he was promoting, his most recent record. It was all mapped out. I continue to wear as many hats as possible to stay creatively fulfilled and keep this beautiful roof over my head. And so I've actually been doing quite a bit of, independent vanity projects from different people around the country, many of whom I've never met. It's been all via email. Like, I'm finally working on my record. Would you, what do you charge to play some keys here or sing some parts here, or blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, man, you people are like really helping buffer this crazy experience for me. I couldn't be more grateful. And, it really goes to show too, obviously we're aware of those acts that get signed and they've got some kind of promotion machine behind them. And then there's like many, many people, for whatever reason, things didn't happen for them that way, or they're not interested in that, but they're as influenced by the Beatles as somebody else who says they are. And it's like, stuff's really fun to play on. And I wish I could remember their name. There was a band from England I played on last year. I don't think anybody knows who they are. And I was like, where's this? It was like somewhere between Bob Mould, Husker Du meets Prefab Sprout. So like, imagine an even prettier, more beautiful Husker Du, Bob Mould. And I was in awe, and I was like, how is this even possible? But I got to play on that, and so I'm very grateful, and a lot of that's been going on recently.
And you're probably still working with guys like Joe. Is he sending you stuff remotely to work on? Ciccarelli?
He is. I just played on the new Brandon Flowers, which might be Killers, which wasn't through Joe, but that was something that your audience would know of. And Joe, he will hand off a variety of miscellaneous stuff. But, the joy of working with Joe, and the reason we work so well together, is because he is the vision. And he just like harnesses me through that. He's my, don't waste your time with these 10 ideas, focus on this idea here. So it has slowed down the process a bit. But I'm okay with that. I've got all these toys that are finally set up in my room for the first time in years because I'm amassing all this stuff, and now I'm just a few patch points away, and I've got some synth module from '83 or some synth module from 1997 or whatever, and I get to have fun trying stuff. So I'll just load a bunch of stuff on the tracks for the producer. It's like, all right, here's 10 ideas for your chorus. I like them all. Obviously, you won't. Pick what's going to work best. And so, again, just super grateful that these opportunities exist in my line of work.
It is amazing with the digital world what we can do now. I think, Ken, with these guys having worked with so many incredible producers and stuff, that's probably another perspective as well. When you're getting to work with musicians that have been beaten up by so many other producers that by the time you get the ideas, you've got that sort of like focus through, all of the accumulated knowledge that they've learned.
Oh yeah, well for sure. Well, and I've watched them get beat. I've been the guy in the corner, like getting the food, watching these guys, But not so much for Tim and Eric, but for Roger. For sure, I was on sessions with Roger before I think he even knew. There's like 4 bald engineers in LA. We all get mistaken for each other, and I think it took a while before finally, it was like he put the name to the face. But yeah, for sure. There's in all these guys, you can tell that there's a certain sort of things that seem like they're going to be a good idea at the time, or things that say, for example, like when I was a kid making demos, the moment I learned like what double tracking a vocal did, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to double track the vocal. I'm going to make the double as loud as the lead. I'm going to pan one to the left and one to the right. It's going to sound awesome. And it makes an awesome sounding demo. You know what I mean? And then you realize that, if you're going to do some real record making, there's actually, it's nice to work with people that you don't have to kind of go like, okay, we didn't have to go to rock and roll school. I didn't have to explain a bunch of stuff to them. Like, no, this is how we're going to do it. It was like everyone was I like that, I tend to, that's where I feel most comfortable.
Yeah, I think as a producer, I'm sure you understand this. You hire guys of this level because you know that they've been in a room with guys like Ciccarelli and all the rest of the great guys around, and you can pretty much 99% of the way let them do their thing and then just guide it because lots of other people have done a lot of work for you. I mean, that's the reality, It's my productions got better when I could hire great players who could get it like that, and then I was really just kind of guiding. I could just say big words. I mean, you speak to a great bass player and you say Carol Kay, and you talk about Beach Boys, they're probably going to put a bit of foam under the bass almost immediately and go boom, 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 boom. They're going to know what you're talking about. There's just certain things that we say to each other that we take for granted, but that's because of the massive amount of acquired knowledge that these guys have got from working with all of these different artists and all of these different producers and engineers. It's pretty fantastic.
Well, I mean, there's something, and it's funny because it's sort of the inverse. When Tim mentioned earlier that, like, there's a real charm to the sound of a struggle happening, meaning when somebody's playing a lick that they have to is. Like, I really enjoy the sound of somebody playing right on the edge of what they can barely do.
Sure.
But I also like the sound of people playing so effortlessly. You know what I mean? And in LA, and not just LA, but any major music market, that's what you get when you get guys who can execute an idea perfectly. My favorite is when you combine the two. And bands, like a lot of post-punk bands, will have like the best, like, think of Gang of Four as like the best rhythm section ever, and then the guy couldn't sing a note on tune in the world. And so it's this amazing thing because you got all the street you could ever want because the singer doesn't even know what key the song is in, but then the bass player and the guitar player are amazing, and
like a machine gun.
I love bands that have a combination, and good bands will also know, like, hey, like they said, like, Roger, we want you to play this. If we want it to sound like authentic punk rock, it kind of has to be, and it's also, for example, like, no one's going to talk about how good Chrissie Hynde is as a guitar player, but just from working with somebody at that level, if her guitar isn't loud and proud in the mix, it doesn't sound like the Pretenders. You know what I mean? You have to take the thing that's the rawest edge, and then you build all the, all the great guitar players that she's ever played complement the fact that she keeps her thing dead simple, just dead simple. And these guys have their ways of doing that by sort of switching up instruments or, pushing themselves out of their comfort zone to keep it so it doesn't sound like Toto. Toto.
Ouch.
I like Toto 4.
I know. I appreciate it too.
Gentlemen, thank you ever so much. It was really, that was a lot of fun. Get to find out the making of the record, a little bit of the gear talk, love it. Ken, thanks for breaking down the process. Wow. There's going to be a link to pre-order the album down there. Also a Spotify link to the current single, which Ken does a mix breakdown of. And there is going to be a link to download his course on that. All of this stuff is available. So make sure you pre-order the album. I'm going to do it anyway. I always buy albums I like, even if somebody gives them to me. Isn't it part of the karma?
That is very karmic.
Yeah, I think
we'll take it.
Yeah. Thank you in advance.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
as always. Thanks so much for figuring out a way, to you and your lovely assistant Eric, for figuring out how to get us all on the grid together, all of the Brady Bunch, about this.
Yeah,
marvelous. Thank you ever so much. Please leave a bunch of comments and questions below. And don't forget to check out all those links. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing, and we'll see you all again very soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.